Today we're going to be speedrunning what I guess is considered the worst Five Nights at Freddy's game in the series. A few months ago, I made a video where I surveyed over 6,000 fans to determine which FNAF games are generally considered to be the best and worst, and way at the bottom of the list was Security Breach Fury's Rage. Now this game was basically developed by series creator Scott Cawthon as a sort of apology for FNAF Security Breach getting its release delayed. And with all of that said, let's see how Security Breach Fury's Rage has been finished in under 11 minutes. Alright, so right after getting through the title screen, we now have to choose which one of the 4 characters we want to play as. Now, as you can see here, each character has their own specific stats, and although each of them are important in their own right, what we need to prioritize for speedrunning this game's any % category is absolute raw power. And apparently, since Monty consumes the most protein out of the bunch here, protein shake, he's the one we'll want to choose. He may not move the fastest, but as we'll see, taking out enemies faster is much more important than how fast we can walk across the screen. Now finally, time for speedrunning this game starts as soon as the screen fades in, and we're greeted to the first of 4 levels encountered in the regular difficulty, the streets. And as soon as we spawn in, we want to break open these boxes to see what's inside, and this is true for any time you see these pop up. These boxes can contain health recovery items or treasure, the latter of which will increase our score, which lets us level up, which then in turn increases our maximum health, as well as number of special spin moves we can do, and obviously the more of those things we have, the better. Now, speaking of the moveset, there are 4 basic moves: the punch, a block, a jump kick, as well as the spinning special move I mentioned previously. Now, for the most part, we'll want to just use the punch to deal the most damage per second, as the other moves will knock down enemies to the ground. And while they're on the ground, we can't deal any more damage until they get back up, so we'll want to keep them upright as long as possible. That said though, jump kicking is really good for movement, as it lets you move around much faster. You just gotta be careful to not knock over any enemies you don't want to unintentionally. Anyways, probably the main key to speedrunning this game is to master what's called the walk jab exploit, and thankfully it's incredibly easy to do. So by default, your character will perform an uppercut move after landing 4 consecutive jabs at an enemy, and this will knock them down, which, as we just went over, is no good for maximum damage output in the shortest amount of time. Thankfully, this is where the walk jab exploit comes in, as if you simply just move to the right or left after the 4th punch, you can actually do 4 more jabs in quick succession to maximize damage before then doing an uppercut. Now unfortunately, this trick only works once for every 2 cycles of jabbing, but it still ends up being super useful for taking out enemies faster, and this is very important as you can only move on to the next area in this game after all enemies are defeated. And secondly, the next best thing we can do to optimize damage output is to group together enemies as much as we can in order to kill as many birds with one stone as possible. Pun intended. Unfortunately for us though, there's an element of RNG with this, as the amount of time an enemy takes to get back up is randomly assigned, and can sometimes even take up to around 10 seconds. So even if you knock down a group together, there's a strong chance that they won't get up at the same time, and this can lead to problems doing some more walk jab combos. Then, after clearing out several waves of Poison Foxies, Thug Life Chippers, Thug Chicas, and Punk Mangles, we get to our first boss fight of the game against the VR Sisters. Since there's 2 of them, you guessed it, the best thing we can try to do is group the pair together, since each of them takes up half the health bar. The more damage we can do to both at the same time, the better. Thankfully though, neither of the 2 puts up a big fight, so this first stage ends up being quite a breeze. Next up, we move on to the Ruin stage, where we get to beat up some Fire Girl enemies and observe the local artwork in the background. This stage also introduces these trap enemies, and what these fellas lack in speed, they more than make up for in terms of both health as well as attack. Not only do they take a whopping 3 full walk jab combos to unalive, but if you let them get close enough to you, their hammer attack is brutal and can reduce your character to ashes in only a few seconds if you're not careful. And now getting to the end of this level, oh hey, Scrap Trap, we get to square up against the second boss, Soul Brawler. This boss is also incredibly easy, and out of all of my runs, I don't think I've ever even seen this guy attack at all. But now's also a good time to go over another handy and another easy trick for speedrunning this game called middling. As the name suggests, this centers around keeping a boss tier enemy in the middle of a stage. Now, why would we want to do this? Well, basically, since you can't walk off screen, if you knock a boss off screen too far, not only will you not be able to damage them while they're down, but you'll also have to wait until they get back up and walk back over to the fighting area. It may not seem like much, but over the course of a speedrun, these extra few seconds can definitely add up. Anyways, bada bing, bada boom, that's another boss down. Then up next, we have the mall-themed stage, and this third level is where the difficulty really starts to ramp up. For starters, right away you'll see that you have to start dealing with these red bouncy balls, and these also show up throughout the whole level. I don't believe you can jump over them or anything, so all you can really do to avoid them damaging you is to block them, which is fine when they're by themselves, but as soon as enemies are added to the mix, these can throw a big wrench into performing some walk jab combos. Now this stage also introduces these marionette enemies, and although they're quite weak and can be taken out with a single kick or jab combo, they're very fast and tend to spawn in large quantities, leaving your back turned to at least a few of them while trying to perform a walk jab combo on another group. So for this, it's good to either do a spin kick, which can quickly dispatch a group in both directions, or let's finally talk about Anim Dude. As you've probably been seeing so far, we can collect these little fellas, which lets us call in Scott Cawthon's Self-Insert, or Anim Dude as he's referred to in this game, to come give you a hand in combat. Now in general, Anim Dude can be really helpful in knocking down or defeating enemies in a section of the screen that you aren't covering, but this can also be detrimental when speedrunning this game. Since Anim Dude does knock down enemies, there's a strong chance they will take longer to defeat compared to the maximum damage output of a walk jab combo, especially if the enemies get knocked off screen, doubly so during a boss fight. But that said, in some situations like when getting overwhelmed by large numbers of weak enemies, Anim Dude can be a lifesaver. Anyways, this small level actually has the one and only mid-boss in this game, as we're forced to refight the VR sisters here once again. Thankfully though, they're just as easy as they were in the first level, so they shouldn't be much of an issue, as long as you don't get surrounded. The mall level finally culminates in having to square up against the thick boy Megabrow, and personally, I think this is the most difficult fight in the game. And this isn't because Megabrow here is all too challenging, but this fight also throws multiple red balls or marionettes at you, making pulling off combos all the more difficult. The key to this fight is to just really pay attention to blocking and jump kicking as needed to deal with the balls and marionettes respectively, and if you can manage to middle Megabrow as much as possible, that's yet another boss fight in the books. Now finally, we get to the fourth and final level of the normal difficulty, the Underground Factory. And here we're introduced to the last new enemy type, Ice Freddies, and these fellas are basically the toughest regular enemy in the game, featuring good speed, attack, and health stats. For the most part, this stage is basically a gauntlet of fighting hordes of all of the enemies you've encountered along your journey so far. Overall, not too much else to the stage that we haven't covered already, just gotta keep punching and punching at the waves of enemies that get sent your way. And now finally, the climax of this game has us squaring up against none other than Vanny herself. This would tease the character that would later end up being a big disappointment in FNAF Security Breach. This boss fight is also quite tricky and can be quite annoying too. You'll again have to deal with wave after wave of minor enemies. Vanny can randomly throw a dagger projectile attack at you that you always have to be ready to block, and Vanny's movement is random and erratic, as unlike every other enemy in this game, she will tend to sometimes walk away from you instead. And this makes it extra important to try and not knock her down off screen, as there's a non-zero chance that when she gets back up, she will walk even further off screen, making it even longer until you can start dealing more damage to her. But if you can string together enough walk jabs and keep her in the middle, you can give her the 1-2 Monty and Vanny is down for the count, peace is restored or whatever happens in this game's lore, and time for the speedrun stops as soon as the game fades to black. After only a handful of runs for this game, my best time ended up being just over 12.5 minutes, and this actually puts me currently at 4th place in the world on speedrun.com. Now the current world record is held by Semicolon, who has held that first spot since 2021 with a time of only 10 minutes and 50 seconds. There aren't really many extra tricks, but the top run just goes to show how much mastering movement, optimizing multi-kills, and of course getting good RNG can help with the time here. Although it seems to be the most disliked FNAF game in the series, this game is still pretty fun to play through, and it's incredibly easy to start speedrunning as there's a very low learning curve compared to some of the other games I've covered on this channel. So if you're interested in giving it a whirl, I highly recommend it, and I'll leave a link to the speedrun.com page in the description below. Anyways, that'll wrap up this video, and I hope you enjoyed. Also, a special shout out to Semicolon for helping me out big time for learning how to speedrun this game. If you enjoyed this video, check out some of the other speedruns I've covered, and be sure to subscribe to find your way back here in the future. And as always, thank you all so much for stopping by today, and I will see you in a bit.